In my last video, I reviewed the most controversial video games of the 1990s. Some were pretty bad. Others were kind of addictive or pushed the boundaries of blood and gore. Of course, the lessons learned from the experiences of the 1980s and early 90s was that controversy sells. So let's do it harder. With those ideas in mind, allow me to present to you Night Trap, the 1992 full motion video game created by Digital Pictures that pushed boundaries of all sorts. In the end, even by the tighter standards of the 1990s, I really don't think Night Trap was that big of a deal, or even vaguely violent. What it really was pretty technologically advanced, even if the gameplay was a little wonky. Of course, it also was literally the subject of congressional hearings, condemned by those who thrived on outrage, and helped to change the course of the video game industry. Let's start here. Like most games that push the boundaries of technology, Night Trap took years from conception to release. Multiple men were involved in the initial creation of the first concept that eventually became Night Trap, including Tom Zito, James Riley, and Rob Fulop. All were working with Atari founder Nolan Bushnell in various capacities at the time that they came together. Working together, the three men developed a system that used VHS technology to create movie gaming experiences that featured interactive elements. The new system, which they called Nemo, which stood for Never Ever Mention Outside, allowed four tracks to be played simultaneously. Players could then interact with those tracks for gameplay purposes. Inspired by the 1981 play Tamara, in which multiple stories simultaneously occur in 13 different rooms, the three men created an interactive movie, Scene of the Crime. In that 5-minute demo, players have to switch between four different surveillance cameras, trailing characters who are acting suspiciously and are suspects in a theft. At the end of the 5 minutes, players have to guess who stole the money. In December 1986, the three men showed off the demo to Hasbro. The company liked the demo and funded the Nemo project for the purposes of creating additional games. With the technology created and the funding in place, Tom Zito hired writer Terry McDonell to write the script that eventually became Night Trap. The men involved with the creation of the game agreed that surveillance cameras was a good use of the technology, but they wanted to add interactive elements. The script evolved over time, moving from a plot in which a billionaire must guard their money in a house to what Night Trap ultimately became. In an accurate guess of things to come, Hasbro had concerns about the concept of, quote, reproducible, end quote, violence in the game. The vampires couldn't actually bite or move quickly, which is why devices are used to drain blood. Yes, that's right. All this tumult over a vampire game that barely featured any biting. The game itself leads off with this cinematic glory, featuring a very heavily armed team. You are introduced to Commander Sims of the Sega Control Attack Team, or Special Control Attack Team on non Sega versions, otherwise known as SCAT. Yeah, SCAT. You learn five teenagers disappeared from the Martin estate, which is a winery. There are five members of the Martin family who operate the estate: husband and wife, Victor and Sheila, their kids, Jeff and Sarah, and cousin Tony. Five teenage girls disappeared from the home, but the Martin family was cleared of any wrongdoing. Upon further investigation, SCAT discovered a series of traps and security cameras in the home. Thanks to some high tech trickery, SCAT gained control of those traps and cameras. You activate traps to kill the augurs, those are the vampire gang men played by stuntmen, who were working with the Martin family. Night Trap used the technique of multiple endings successfully, creating an onus on the player to do what they could to save all the main characters. Let in too many augurs, or let certain civilians be killed early, and Lieutenant Sims will harshly yell at you before kicking you out of the game, forcing you to restart. Shooting took place over 16 days in 1987 using a 250-page script. The game appears in full motion video. To be clear, FMV games were not new. These games, which, as the name implies, rely on recorded video rather than graphics, began rising in popularity in 1983. These games used laser discs for play, which enhanced their graphics while also making them more expensive. This would be an omen of things to come. FMV was cool, but the tech didn't exist to easily bring it into home consoles. As such, Night Trap had the potential to really drive up the production values of video games. Also, keep this in mind. Night Trap and another game, Sewer Shark, were meant to launch the Nemo system. This helps explain why Night Trap had a $1.5 million budget, making it one of the most expensive video games during that entire time period. As part of the enhanced budget, developers used real actors. The most famous actress cast in the film was Dana Plato, who had just finished her time on Different Strokes. Unfortunately, Plato was struggling with various drug and alcohol issues at the time, likely leading to her inclusion on the filming. The game featured heavy integration on having multiple points of view through the security cameras, of which there were 8. As such, multiple events happened on the screen at the same time. You, as the player, had the freedom to figure out what you wanted to watch. That freedom was somewhat jarring for players in 1992 who were, of course, used to only watching one thing happen at a time. For players not used to the system, it can be deeply disorienting. Sewer Shark and Night Trap were completed, and the Nemo system, now called Control Vision, was set for a 1989 release. Unfortunately, Hasbro, scared off by the high production cost of the movie and the increasing cost of the system, which was $299 by the time it was ready for release, canceled the project. They harbored doubts throughout the shooting, with Barry Halpern, who ran the project for Hasbro, saying, quote, "We knew it was flawed, and we were disappointed by the play experience that was generated by the project," end quote. From a financial perspective, the decision to pull the plug makes sense, as the system would have cost 3 times the amount of a regular Nintendo. If it had been released, I suspect we'd be talking about this system in a video about failed console releases. However, all was not lost for the game, which was still complete and ready for release, needing only a willing partner and a system that could handle the technological demands of the FMV. Tom Zito was able to purchase the rights to the game and founded his own company, Digital Pictures, for the purpose of partnering with Nintendo on their Super Nintendo CD-ROM. That infamously never materialized, but the Sega CD did. A deal was struck in 1992, 5 years after its original filming. Night Trap was released for the Sega CD. As you would imagine, the advertising for the game leaned heavily into its interactive nature. As noted in the Sega Visions magazine, quote, "It is the first game that can truly be called an interactive movie, a movie where you star and you control the action," end quote. I gave the game my best shot and did a couple of playthroughs. Yeah, it doesn't hold up well. On the one hand, getting to pick and choose what you listen to? Very cool. The traps are confusing. You don't know where they are, and the game doesn't tell you. You also have to periodically change the color of the traps so you can still operate them, despite efforts by the Augers and Martins to override you out of the system. When do you have to change the traps? Well, you have to listen to the right camera at the right time. Miss it? You lose. So, here's the thing about the game. Despite the presence of weaponry and the occasional vaguely scantily clad woman, there's really stunningly little controversial about it. At all. There's barely any real violence on the screen. Yes, there are scenes where blood is drained from women, but those scenes were, according to developers, designed to avoid being realistic. You almost never see any blood throughout the entire film. There's also the so called nightgown scene in which Lisa is captured in the bathroom and taken off camera. Opponents of the game argued that this scene promoted sexual aggression towards women. Others noted that the so called violence is incredibly campy and designed to look unrealistic. In reality, this scene and the entire game look like a B movie that can be seen in the cast and crew, most of whom were either just starting in Hollywood or already past the peak of their career success. As stated in Jamie Russell's book Generation Xbox, How Video Games Invaded Hollywood, the game is, quote, pure slapstick, end quote, with you spending most of it watching girls gossip and watching villains get fired into traps that seem to send them into oblivion. So, why did this game kick up such controversy, despite the fact that, in reality, it's pretty tame? Well, a few reasons. First, let's be clear, it fit the narrative. There is never any real violence in the game, it's all implied. Add this hint of violence and slightly scantily clad women, and you've got the ingredients for a moral panic that could be used by those seeking to create trouble or advance their own political agenda. This leads to a second question: why did the game fit the narrative so well? In this regard, Night Trap was a victim of its own success, its technological advancement. The most popular games that year were Street Fighter II and Sonic 2. Yeah, Street Fighter is, violent, but it's obviously done in a cartoon like style and meant to be unrealistic. That wasn't the case for Night Trap. The fact that this game was shot in FMV meant that viewers could easily see all of the action in a deeply realistic format, more realistic than anything else that was available at the time. Night Trap featured prominently in the 1993 congressional hearings on video game violence. Those hearings, led by Senator Joseph Lieberman of Connecticut, explored the topic of video game violence in America, the consequences of that violence, and what could be done to limit the role of that violence. Supposedly, Lieberman first became interested in violence in video games after his chief of staff's 9-year-old son asked for a copy of Mortal Kombat. Investigating the game, that chief of staff, Bill Anderson, was horrified at what he found was available to his child. Digging in further, Anderson also found Night Trap. However, it's worth noting that this is the official story. There were also allegations that Nintendo themselves brought Sega's violence to the attention of Lieberman, putting their rivals in the crosshairs. Indeed, even before the hearings, the campaign against Night Trap began. On December 1st, 1993, Senator Lieberman held a press conference to discuss violence in video games, joined by children's advocates and the actor who played Captain Kangaroo for some reason. Night Trap footage was shown, and Lieberman said of the game, quote, "It ends with this attack scene on this woman in lingerie in her bathroom. I know that the creator of the game said it was all meant to be a satire of Dracula, but nonetheless, I thought it sent out a pretty wrong message," end quote. At the first congressional hearing, Maryland Draws of the National Coalition on Television Violence used the game as evidence that the video game industry was, quote, endorsing violence, end quote. Later in the hearing, representatives of Nintendo and Sega testified, with Bill White of Sega saying that games like Night Trap were clearly only meant for adults. White also noted that Sega had developed their own rating system, but Howard Lincoln of Nintendo countered that the rating system had been developed after complaints about games like Night Trap. Notably, Lincoln also said, quote, let me say for the record, I want to state that Night Trap will never appear on a Nintendo system, end quote. Ironic, for reasons we'll get to later. The scene in which Lisa is attacked in her nightgown earned particular scorn at the hearing. Senator Lieberman was referring to it when he called the game, quote, gratuitous and offensive and ought not to be available to people in our society. After the first and second hearing, video game representatives, including of Sega, Nintendo, Atari, and more, pledged to develop an industry wide ratings board. This was done, in part, to stave off federal action, which came in the form of House and Senate bills that would mandate such a program. If the hope of the congressional hearings was to limit the sales of the game, well, it didn't work until it did. In the immediate aftermath of the hearings, Night Trap sold 50,000 copies, a massive number that was driven, in no small part, thanks to the publicity surrounding the congressional hearings. The hearings also helped to build Sega's brand as the edgier alternative to family friendly Nintendo. However, the controversy did ultimately clip the game's wings. In the aftermath of an organized telephone campaign, both Toys R Us and KB Toys pulled the game, citing customer complaints. In 1994, Sega pulled the game from the market completely, with Bill White saying that the controversy surrounding the game was negatively impacting an industry wide discussion about a rating system. Before the game was withdrawn, it sold 1 million copies, making it pretty successful. The controversy surrounding the game and the publicity kicked up by the congressional hearings did have one notable long term impact: the creation of the ESRB, or Entertainment Software Ratings Board. This self regulatory agency assigns ratings to games based on the content of those games. It is largely based off of the Motion Picture Association's film rating system. The ratings allow parents to make more informed choices about what games their kids play and what they ultimately purchase. As a kid, I remember thinking that the ratings were stupid. As an adult, and one with kids, I get it a lot more. Of course, the withdrawal from the market would not be the last of Night Trap. Efforts to re release the game via Kickstarter in 2014 failed, but a 25th anniversary edition was released in 2017 for the PlayStation, Windows, and Nintendo Switch. Howard Lincoln's comments notwithstanding. This version features deleted scenes, developer commentary, a theater mode, and a playable version of Scene of the Crime, the tech demo, which ultimately led to Night Trap. And, as a sign of how far we've come, the game received an ESRB rating of teen, not mature. So the ESRB did get that one right. In total, the fact that the game was controversial at all is kind of pathetic, at least by today's standards. But this was 1992. Yes, elected officials, with an assist from Nintendo, were trying to pin certain video game creators. There's honestly two interpretations here. You can either assume that people were scared, or that politicians and businesses were looking to take advantage of the violence in video games. My honest take is that, like everything, it's a little bit of both. People were scared, but this fear was self perpetuating, and whenever there's fear, someone's going to try to take advantage of it. I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. If you did like what you saw, please hit the like or subscribe button, or please click on the next video that the almighty YouTube algorithm has left for you. Have a wonderful day out there, friends, and hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I like making it. Take care.